Stop letting them diagnose your love. In 2022, they added something to the DSM-5, and they call it prolonged grief disorder. Translation, if you're still grieving too long, longer than the medical community thinks you should be, then they're going to name it a disorder. So let's talk about that. I'm Sharon Brubaker. I'm founder of the Grief School. The Grief School is a place where healing begins. And I need you to hear me. And I need you to hear me clearly about this. Your grief is not a malfunction. It is not a malfunction. It serves a purpose in your body. It is a response to losing someone who mattered, losing someone who was important to you. Here's what happens. You have a loss in your life. And in the first year, after losing your person, your heart really doesn't know how to respond to that. So it responds with shock. Year 2, there's this reality that takes over where you realize you're really not going back to the life you had before. And year 3 is when everyone expects you to be normal again. But here's the truth. They truly expected that at 6 months, but they were afraid to tell you. But now they're open enough to tell you. But you still wake up every day thinking about your person. You feel like that hit in your chest every morning, like you can't breathe. You are still dropping to your knees and crying for them. And now someone says to you, hey girl, don't you think it's been long enough? Don't you think it's been long enough? Don't you think it's time for you to stop grieving? Long enough for who? Long enough for the DSM-5 who has finally diagnosed me? The DSM-5 says that after 12 months, and they extended that because it used to be 6 months, if you are deeply longing and preoccupied and struggling to function, you might meet the criteria of prolonged grief disorder. Here's the part no one says out loud. Some people are really debilitated. They can't work. They cannot sleep. They cannot function. That's what grief does to us. They need help. They need real help. They need structured help. That's not weakness. That's a grieving. That's human. That's a human response to loss. But here's the other side. Grief doesn't follow a calendar. It doesn't know that tomorrow's your anniversary. It follows attachment. You had an attachment to that person, and that person is no longer here. Your whole nervous system is wired around that person. It's not shocking that it takes longer than normal for you to start standing upright again, for your year to reorganize your life. It's not a year, it's not too long. Long grief does not automatically mean broken. Let me say that again. Long grief does not automatically mean broken. It might mean that you love deeply. It might mean that you have no support. It might mean that you've never processed this shit before. It might mean that you've been forced to be strong and now you've stacked the losses one on top of another. It might mean that you have compound grief, that you've avoided it for so long because no one is here to help you move this grief. Here is the difference that I care about for you. Number 1, you are grieving. Number 2, you are stuck. Number 3, grief looks like pain, and that pain is not moving. It hurts, but it's not shifting. You're crying. You remember every memory you've ever had with them. You lean in, you process, but you're still not able to move. Stuck grief looks like you're numb all the time. You're frozen. You're avoiding. Everything becomes an obsession for you. You're obviously replaying the same moments over and over and over again with no containment. That is not about being a disorder. That's about unprocessed grief living in your heart. Unprocessed grief trying to get out. And unprocessed grief needs structure. You do not need a label. You deserve help. You deserve a listener, someone who will listen without judging your grief. You don't need a diagnosis to work on your grief. You need containment. You need understanding. You need to understand what the definition of grief is. You need to understand what processing is. You need a method. You need to understand what it means to complete a relationship that is broken in your heart. But here's the truth. If you avoid grief long enough, it hardens. It hardens in your heart, and it turns into anxiety. It turns into rage. It turns into symptoms in your body. It turns into, I didn't even recognize myself anymore. That's not because you're mentally ill. It's because you never had a place to put this grief. You've never had a place to lay this grief. You've never had a safe place to talk about the ugly parts of this grief. Seeing their body, getting the phone call, having to go to the funeral. You're still hurting years later and wondering what's wrong with you. Nothing's wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. You're a griever. I'm a griever. We are all grievers. But nothing is not the answer either. Not doing anything is not the answer. Girl, you need to grieve that shit. You need to grieve it on purpose. You need to grieve it with a structure. You need to grieve it one layer at a time. You do not need to be diagnosed to decide who the hell you really are. You do not need to be diagnosed to decide you really need to heal. If you're tired of white knuckling it, this is exactly why I created the grief school, because I needed it for me. I needed it for me. I needed this structure for me. And now I share it with you. Can't wait to meet you in person.